Hello, good evening. I'm George Mendoza, and this is the 12th episode of the Philippine Ruby Group podcast. Um, so, last week we weren't able to do a podcast because I had a family emergency to attend to. Basically, my niece had poisoning, so we had to rush her into the hospital, but she's doing well now. Anyway, to recap, if you've seen the last podcast 2 weeks ago, I shared the story about a data migration I did that caused a bug in our production site. Uh, so, in that last podcast, I said that there was a continuation to that story about how I fixed the problem and how exactly that fix wasn't quite the right fix for the problem. So that's what I'm going to talk about here. Uh, so let's. If you hear that, sorry, that's my daughter. She's a bit fussy. Hopefully, she'll get some good night's sleep. But anyway, to recap, uh, a few weeks ago, I I deployed the new feature to our production website, and that new feature required some new tables. It required some tables to be deleted, and and it required transferring data from old tables to new ones. Because of the way I wrote the data migration, uh, it caused a minor bug in production. Not minor. If my boss hears this right now, it was a major issue. So what happened? Basically, one table had missing data that was due to the migration. I also did the wrong thing by feeling too secure and deleting the old table. So now it was a bit hard to fix the data directly from by just getting back the data from the old table. Fortunately, we had a backup database, uh, which no, it wasn't a backup database, but we had a backup file for that particular day, and I can still get the data from that file, but I had to convert it from SQL format to CSV. Now, during our meeting, online meeting to discuss this bug, our senior dev suggested that I write a one-time script to fix the bug. So in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I could write a migration to fix the bug, no problem. So it turns out that he was referring to something more specific, but I'll get to that later. Okay, so how did I fix the bug? First, I had to get the data from the backup file and convert it to CSV. And then I wrote a data migration to convert that CSV data to and pass it on to the new table that was broken. So I wrote the migration, and this time around, when I wrote the test for the migration, I made sure that it was more robust than the last test that I wrote. I also made sure to test the migration locally in development. So I was feeling good. I committed all of this, the migration and the data from the CSV into our repo, and pushed it to our Git repo. Now, during deployment, I was feeling a bit apprehensive about running the migration directly through our Capistrano deployment. So what I did was just run Capistrano deploy without the migration option. And then once the deployment was done, I SSH to production and ran RakeDB migrate from there. So far so good. I checked the production website and everything was working correctly. So um, problem solved. Right. So that was it. The following day, I received an email from our senior dev, and he wasn't too hot on the solution that I made. Uh, the biggest he didn't he didn't like that I implemented the fix as a migration. So when he said he wanted a one-time script, what he was saying was, I want a script uh, that you can run on the server, that's not tied, that is throwable. It's not tied to our code. It's just something that you run there and to fix the bug and to get it to get it to get it done. Uh, so that's what he meant by a one-time script. It's a it might be just a single Ruby file that you can run from Rails runner or from Rails console, and it just gets it does the same thing as the migration, except that it's not a migration. It's just a script. So why didn't he like the migration? Uh, there are two reasons why. The first is that because I've written it as a migration, I needed now to put the production CSV data, the data that I got from the backup file, and store it in our repo. So this was a bit, although there were no major security issues with this particular data, um, it still felt wrong. Still felt dirty to put data that is only relevant to production into a repo. In the same way that you probably don't want to put data that's specific only to your development or to your local machine to your repo. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that because it was a migration, uh, because I've written it as a migration, I've I've added unnecessary dependencies to the solution. So since it's a migration, then if I run it, I have to run it uh, under Rails. And if for some reason that migration fails, then uh, it fails midway or it hangs up, then it's a bit harder to fix. Another thing was that because I've written it as a migration, I could have run the migration during the deployment with Capistrano deploy, and it would have magnified the problem further. So again, it's the same thing. If I had run it as a through Capistrano deployment and it failed midway, then it would have been harder to fix. So when our senior dev suggested a one-time script, he wanted a solution that's close to the metal, something that is something that's very close to just plain Ruby that you can run with Rails Runner, and that you can run independently of your application. So that solution would theoretically be a lot simpler. It would have less dependencies, and it should be easier to recover from that if that script goes wrong. So he's right, and this was a good lesson for me. I think in this case, when when I had the problem to fix, I just thought of the nearest tool to fix the problem, which was in this case just to write a migration. I didn't think further about the consequences of uh, that particular solution for this problem. So that's about it. Um, the moral of the story is that whenever you're working with production data, always be more cautious than usual. Uh, you never want to break things that are already broken in production. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully, you can join me again next week for the next podcast. I'm George Mendoza. Goodbye.